was like playing brag or poker. You could end up with all these marbles. And of course, if a young lad lost them all, would get upset, he lost his marbles. And I don't know whether that's where the expression comes from, but I often wondered. Maybe I should Google it and find out. But these games used to go on for hours, and sometimes you'd be playing in the gutter and you'd end up going down the road, round the block and back again, still playing the same game. But terrific fun anyway. That's covered that game. I'm trying to think of some others we played. What else do I remember? I mean, I remember living in the prefab. There were no cars, but there were lots of horses, because our milkman had a horse-drawn cart. The coalman had a horse-drawn cart. My brother again reminded me that there was a grocer that came round that had like an old Romany gypsy cart with lanterns hanging on it, that he would sell fruit and veg. But there wasn't that much to eat because, you know, things in the war were rationed, and I remember being sent out with a ration book. You had so many stamps a week. You could have like 3 or 4 ounces of butter a week, and you had to give your coupon in, and once you bought your allocation of butter or meat or whatever it was for the week, sweets were rationed. Most foodstuffs were rationed, and you could only buy what your ration book allowed you to buy, and there was no more. Unless you could get it black market or nicked somewhere, then you didn't. But we had a milkman that we all knew very well, a little short man. I remember him with a big flat black hat, and he used to come round on his horse and cart delivering milk, and he was the guy Mum used if ever Mum, we know he kept chickens, and occasionally one of these poor chickens wouldn't exactly volunteer, but he'd give himself up for Sunday dinner. Mum wouldn't do it, so it was the milkman that would kill and clean and gut the chicken for us. And, I remember him quite well. We also had, on Sundays, a man would come around called the Muffin Man. I think the Muffin Man has been going for hundreds of years. I was looking for a picture of a Muffin Man on the internet. And they go back literally to the 17th century, I think. But he came on a Sunday, because Sunday tea, I suppose, when people were home, and he had a big tray of muffins on his head, balanced on like a rubber quoit, a rubber hoop, you know, and a big bell that he would ring as he walked up and down, calling out to indicate that he had fresh muffins for sale. So street vendors, and of course the rag and bone man, that was another man that came round with a horse. So there was always all shit in the road to be shovelled up, and you know, with people's back gardens and growing a lot of vegetables, that's where it was. It didn't lie in the road for long. It was, someone would run out with a bucket and a shovel while it was still steaming usually, and you know, it'd end up in your garden on your vegetables. So we had to wash our vegetables before we had them. So my first school was when I was in Peckham, obviously, and it was Oliver Goldsmith's school, which was half a mile from me, I suppose, down Talbot Road to Peckham High Street. And Oliver Goldsmith's school still stands today. It's changed a bit. They've again built in part of the playground and modern structure, but the old school building still stands, and I think it's still a school. It may be a college now, but it's the school, of course, where you may have, it was on the news a few years ago where that young black boy Damilola Taylor was killed. Oliver Goldsmith School in Peckham. So that was my first school, and I remember very clearly walking down to school. I think my mum took me at first, and it was split into two. There was a nursery school for the very young ones, where we didn't do the full day. Well, no, I suppose we did. It was on in the morning, and I remember afternoons we had lunch there. We had milk in the morning, a small bottle of milk, like a third of a pint or a quarter of a pint, little milk bottles, and we all sat and drank our milk. Then we'd have lunch, and in the afternoon we didn't have lessons. Our room was full of little beds, and we all had to lay down and have a sleep in the afternoon. It'd be great if they did that today, wouldn't it? So yeah, we had a sleep in the afternoon, and I remember that quite clearly. I can actually still remember Mrs. Hunt, one of my teachers. Can you imagine that? I don't remember anyone else, so there must have been something about her that stuck in my mind. But I remember her, and I remember we had no school journeys at that school. That wasn't until I went to Thomas Carlton. But I remember that quite clearly. A lovely big playground we had, crossing a busy main road to get to the school. But I used to come home on my own, past the fire station, and they were good years. And I think one or two of the people I knew there, I still talk to occasionally on Friends Reunited, but not many people of my generation or my age using it. Another story that I can tell you, or a thing I used to get up to. My dad was one of only a couple of dads in the whole road that had a car. So weekends, some dad was good, he'd take me and Mike out, take us out in the car somewhere. And there was a place not too far from Peckham, just south of London, called Keston Ponds, and it was a piece of wooded land with a couple of big lakes, not ponds, they were lakes, though the place is called Keston Ponds. And at the right time of the year, I'd get Dad to take us. I'd say, Dad, can we please go to Keston Ponds? And of course what I was after was tadpoles, because I lived in London, which was all built up, and there were no ponds and there were no tadpoles. But I'd take jam jars with string tied around them, and if tadpoles were about, I'd come back with hundreds and hundreds of tadpoles. But the object was, I'd barter. The object was to barter these tadpoles, and I would swap them. And I forget what the rate of exchange was, but it was like 1 tadpole a marble, or 2 tadpoles a marble, or whatever the going rate was. And I'd get rid of all my tadpoles in a couple of days. And I then owned most of the marbles in the street, because kids wanted tadpoles. And of course, likely as not, the kids have put fresh water in their tadpoles, or didn't know how to look after them. In a couple of days, all the tadpoles were dead, but I had all the marbles. And so I then become a retailer of marbles, and I would have kids knocking at the door, can I buy some, it's David and I want to buy some marbles, and I'd sell them their marbles back. And it was quite lucrative, because by this time I had not 1 paper round, I think I actually had 4 or 5 paper rounds. Definitely 4 on a Sunday, but in the week I had 2 probably. And on Sunday I didn't finish. I mean, I started at 7 o'clock in the morning, I didn't finish till lunchtime. I mean, I just did so many, but anything that was going I took. And that's what I did to earn money. But another reason, I did mention earlier in the video about when I mentioned mint in the garden, the stuff Dad used to grow. And there's a story, and if you've heard it before, then listen again. Excuse me, but I want to put it on record. I had the idea. My brother had come along and he had a pram, and he was pushed about in the pram. And when his pram wasn't being used, I had the notion of cutting up mint. I obviously was aware that mint was used on a Sunday with new potatoes and roast lamb, and people made mint sauce and put it in their potatoes. And I knew that we had a load of mint in the garden. So I cut down a rake of Dad's mint and tied it all up. And I think it started off, I had a test run first. I took some of the mint tied up, and I went up to a block of flats. It was a hell of a walk, but it was a place called Nunhead Lane, which is the back of Peckham Rye. And I think it was the block of flats that we used that were called Nelson Mandela House in Falls and Horses, where Rodney and Delboy lived. But the reason I'd chosen this block of flats, and only sort of 4 stories high, was because you had lots of front doors in a relatively short space. You know, you didn't have to walk miles up and down road. And I tried this on a Sunday, late Sunday morning, before lunch, knocking, and I forget, I took a basket for the mint, or I don't know, a couple of dozen or a dozen bunches, and I knocked at the door and said, "Bunch of mint, lady, 6pence a bunch," or whatever it was, or 3pence a bunch, or I can't remember exactly, 2pence a bunch maybe. And I sold out first week, so the next week I'd gone and I'd cut the lot down, I'd cut it all down. All Dad come out, he went mental. He said, who? I said, "It'll grow back." And of course it did grow back, but I cut all the mint down, tied it all up in bundles. This time, this was mass production now, this was the big time. I took Mike's pram, my brother's pram, and had it in the pram and I wheeled it all the way up to the flats in Nunhead Lane and knocked at all the doors. Some of them recognised me from the previous week, and I seem to remember I used to try and look scruffy. I mean, I look scruffy anyhow, a little bit like an urchin anyway, but I seem to remember that it was important that I looked raggedy-arsed, was the expression, but I looked a bit of a waif, and I got sympathy. If I knocked at the door, this little boy with his bunch of mint, lady, 3pence, and she'd say, "Oh, look, Harry, he's back again, give him a tanner, or give him 6pence, and I went back with a pram full of money. Well, not full of money, but I remember it was very lucrative, and I was, you know, disappointed that the mint didn't grow any quicker, but that's the thing I remember very vividly, and probably because Dad had been so annoyed about, I don't remember him asking for any of the money, but I mean, I would have given it, but he was all right about it, I think, all right about it. Right, so you've heard the story of the mint and making money. How else did we make money? We made money with Bob a Job, because I was in the Cubs, and he had Bob a Job week where you went around knocking at doors, and you had a card and someone had to fill it in with a stamp or sign that you'd done some work for a shilling. That was what a bob was, it was called shilling. So some people would get you to wash the car, peel vegetables, cut the grass. Some people actually took advantage of you, you know, to do it, and the money you had to go and hand in to the scoutmaster or the cub master when you went that week with your card filled. But sometimes if I didn't produce the card or I didn't have it on me, I'd get the shilling and pocket it. Not very nice, I suppose, but there we are. Things were tight. You didn't get a lot of pocket money when you were a kid. You had to earn it where you could. So that was a way. And I do remember once when my brother got a bit older, he freelanced, the little bugger, and he nicked my cap and scarf and toggle, and he'd gone off Bob a jobbing on his own, and of course he wasn't even a cub. Terrible. I don't know where he got it from, but anyway, he got caught and reprimanded for it. Another thing was seasonal, was a penny for the guy, which you don't really see now, but bonfire night, November the 5th, most kids made a guy, and we had a bonfire, usually on a bomb site somewhere, not in a garden, a street bonfire. Although we had a very good bonfire night, because we had a really good uncle, my brother's Uncle Len. I've mentioned him before, and he was the best uncle in the world. And he come round, I remember when we were very young, and he came to the prefab. If Mum and Dad went out, he would babysit for us. So he'd come, and Mum and Dad would go, and as soon as they were gone, he'd go, "Now listen lads, I'm just nipping over the pub, I'll be straight back." And he would, over the pub, which was literally 20 paces across the road. It was called the Denman Arms, and you can see it in Telford Place. The pub still stands. And that was in the back garden of that was where one of the bomb sites we played on. But parked over in the Denman Arms would be a young lady, you know, a girlfriend. And so he didn't bring her in when Mum and Dad were there, but he'd leave her in the pub, come to babysit. As soon as they were gone, he'd nip across the road, bring her back, and he'd give us sometimes 2 bob, like 2 shillings, and say, look lads, come on, don't say anything, will you? Go to bed, behave yourself. And of course he'd have an evening in a warm room with his girlfriend. But I digress, because what I was saying was we had really good bonfire nights, because he would come round and he would bring all sorts. Mum used to go mad. He used to bring phosphorus round and magnesium and set things off, fireworks, homemade fireworks, all sorts. And I remember he gave me, and my brother was talking about it the other day, he made me a cannon, a big brass cannon. Well, it was like 8 or 10 inches long, this thing, on a wooden, just like a miniature cannon that you see in these Pirates of the Caribbean thing. And you put a fuse in it, and he showed me how to make gunpowder, and I can still make it with sulphur, saltpetre and some soot from the chimney. I had all the right proportions, and I'd mix it up. And he showed me how to put a bit of fuse. He had a little pinhole at the back of the cannon. We put this little, it was like a little tape fuse you could buy that you could set light to. Put a bit of fuse in, ram the gunpowder in, bang it down hard. Harder you rammed it in, the better the explosion. And then put a wad after it to hold it in place. And this thing used to go, and it used to frighten the living daylights out of everybody. And so the recoil on it was, sometimes the gun would go backwards, the cannon would go backwards further than the ballistic in it would go forward. But great times, and he was a great one for a great uncle for kids, because he was up to more mischief and more tricks than you could imagine. And I do remember also when it was birthday, because he was young and single. And I suppose he would have been 18, 20 when I was a young lad, when he was babysitting. Young, single, had money in the pocket, and he'd come round on our birthdays and take us out and spoil us. I mean, I remember him taking me into a toy shop in Dorchip Lane, big toy shop, and he'd say, all right son, it's your birthday. What do you want? I said, well, I don't know. He'd say, well, go on, anything you want, have anything. And literally, I could have anything in the shop I wanted. You know, that's what it was like. Very, very generous. Very, very generous uncle. Well, I've just been looking back on the first 49 minutes of this DVD, and I've realised, because I didn't script it really too much, I just made a few notes, that and not only did I realise, but I was reminded by my brother, mainly, well not mainly but particularly, of a few things that I'd maybe missed out. So this is like an outtakes or an add-on to the rest of the video. I didn't, of course, talk much about Goodrich Road and the early days, about my grandma, my grandma Weston, who was a small, very quiet lady and a lovely lady. Never told me off, never had a bad word to say. I used to stay with her in the summer holidays sometimes, and she looked after us, and my brother as well, while Mum was working. And she was just a lovely woman. Just a lovely woman, and you'll see pictures of her, not on this, but of course if ancestry.co.uk, all of our family tree is on there, with all the pictures that I've got of all those relatives involved. So that I forgot to mention, and of course the brothers. I mean, Mum's brother Bill, who I didn't really mention, was a super intelligent guy. Got his HNC, used to call in at home on his way home from work when we were in the prefab sometimes, and help me with my homework, maths homework. Very clever guy, algebra, geometry, anything at all he could do. Bill, very clever man. He unfortunately died a lot before Len, probably 15 years ago, maybe more. And Len just died just last year. And then of course there was Arthur Weston, the youngest, and Arthur survives them all and still lives. He sort of lives in a home up in Downham Market. He was brought up because Arthur had a few problems. I think brought about by, they say, by the air raids, by the bombs going off. I don't know whether that's true, but he struggled all his life with getting a job and holding down a job, and he was looked after Grandma died by his brother Len and Jackie, his wife, or Thelma. Jackie was her nickname, and they even took him up to Downham Market from Goodrich Road when they retired 15 years ago, and he's still there now, and he's in a home because he prefers to be there with a lot of friends around him, but Thelma still sees him every week and does his washing, and he's happy. And so that was it. And of course Len I've covered. Len was the nicest uncle you could have, for reasons I've mentioned previously. So I've put that bed to bed now. Another thing that I forgot to mention, when I did the story of the mint, and my brother reminded me that of course I inveigled him into the plot, and he reminded me that when I went up with the pram I made him come with me, and we got into terrible trouble when we got back, not just because the mint was missing and cut down, but because I said to my brother, we've got to look poor, and so I rubbed my hand in the mud and rubbed it all over his face to make him look the part. And to my memory, he acted the part well. I don't know whether I gave him any of the proceeds of the mint. He'll probably deny it and say I didn't. But I would think I probably would have done for his efforts. The other thing that I forgot to mention, when I started off on a discourse about bonfire night and penny for the guy and earning money penny for the guy, but I then got sidetracked because I went on about Len and how he made our bonfire night and how he brought fireworks and how he treated us as children. But what I forgot to mention, and I should have done, that's what I started to talk about but got sidetracked by myself, was that when I made a guy, I had another bright idea that rather than having to get an old pair of trousers and stuff it full of paper and straw and a shirt and stitch it up, and I had a brother, and so I dressed him up and I trained him, I taught him to be still and quiet, and I sat him in a pushchair, put a mask, a stocking on his head, a mask on his face and a hat, and he was the guy. And of course he was very realistic, nicely proportioned, and he'd sit in the pram, and I'd go down to the Peckham railway station, which is still there in Rye Lane, and I'd collect money for a penny for the guy lady, you know. And then one afternoon I had the bright idea of wheeling him down to the arcade. There was a covered arcade market in Peckham, and that may still be there, I don't know, but there are a lot of people in and out there, and I thought, well, I'll park up there and we could maybe increase our turnover a bit. And I had him down there dressed as a guy, and there were some older boys, bigger boys about, being a nuisance and clowning about and threatening us or taking the mickey. And one of them threatened to stab the guy and pulled a knife out. And of course the guy was my brother sitting there. So all hell it broke loose, and then I think Mike jumped out and I shouted and he ran off screaming and went home, and Dad found out what we'd been up to, and I seem to remember that I was in terrible trouble over it. He also reminded me, and it is true, although, so I'll mention it, but, well, we'll get on with the story first. My brother has always been on about he won a baby competition. Well, I suppose he did. He won a beautiful baby competition when he was and I'll put a picture up in a minute. You'll see a picture of me with my brother here, looking after him, protecting him, as you can see, like I still do now. And he won a baby competition, best looking baby. But what he doesn't tell anybody is that at the bottom of our road, next to the fire station and opposite Oliver Goldsmith School, was an RNIB office, Royal National Institute for the Blind. And that's where the competition was. And so the judges were visually impaired, let's say. So that might be the reason why he, I don't want to take anything away from him, because I think there was at least 2 babies in the competition. So, but you know, first is first, isn't it? So I've covered that and my conscience is clear. The other thing about my brother that I didn't say, and I remember this, he had this bloody thing about spiders, arachnids. He loved spiders. We'd go anywhere, and in those days there were a lot more spiders about than today. Garden spiders, they were everywhere, on blackberry bushes, in the fields, on hedges, everywhere. He saw a spider, he'd stop, he'd pick it up, he'd take it back home, and all round our prefab was an overhang, like not an eave, because it was a flat roof, but it overhung by a foot or something. And he would put the spiders up there, so you could go outside, and I think I've got a picture here of a garden spider of the type, and they were all different colours, and so he collected them by the colour and by the, I don't know what he did, but he had a knowledge about spiders, and you could go out and there would be hundreds of spiders. Every 6 inches there would be another spider's web. How the poor buggers survived, I don't know. But anyway, and he would catch flies and feed them, and he had his favourites. And but I suppose it's harmless enough. Me, I have my jackdaw, and of course we both had a dog that I didn't mention called Judy, a golden retriever, golden Labrador. And here she is. Here's a picture of Judy with us as a family, with my brother, myself, mum and dad, and another one of mum sitting in the car. We've been away one weekend, and the dog Judy is sitting outside the car. So that covers that. The other thing that I didn't mention when I spoke about games and what we did and what we played, all of the kids in South London at that time, in our street, in Denman Road, was the road opposite our prefab, that we all made scooters and carts. You know, we didn't have many toys, but we made toys, and they were soapbox carts, and I've got a couple of pictures of a soapbox cart here, and you can see this is not actually me, but it's the same era, the pictures the same time, and it's the same design of car. And they were made with a soapbox on a plank of wood, a front axle made of wood, a couple of small pram wheels, the front pram wheels at the front, and the plank of wood was on an eye bolt, so you could steer it with a piece of rope, and the back 2 wheels were larger pram wheels, and we used to play for hours, and they got quite sophisticated, these carts. And the roads weren't cobbled. I remember the roads being just flat bitumen, like tar macadam, just flat bitumen the roads were, and ideal for riding carts like that about, and ideal for another thing we made that was a scooter, like the scooters you have today, and that was made with 2 planks of wood. One plank of wood you stood on, one plank of wood as the upright with a small bit of wood across as the handles. You had 2 eye bolts that went into the upright, 2 eye bolts that went into the running board, and a bolt down to hold them to give you the steering mechanism. And the front and back wheels were ball races, ball bearings that would come out of a car's engine, out of a drive shaft or something, and we used to get those from the breaker's yard. And they had a real peculiar sound, and they used to go like buggery, these things, and we all made them, all the kids had them, and we used to decorate them, you know, to suit ourselves, and they were great fun. I unfortunately couldn't find a picture of one of those, but I think you've got the gist of it. So I think that about covers this first hour of video. I suppose reflecting and thinking about it now again, which I've had to do in this video, it was a nice childhood, really. I know we had the war, but that's what it was like. We didn't know any different. You know, like we didn't have sweets much, we didn't have toys much while the war was on and while rationing was on. And we didn't have a lot to eat, I suppose, by today's standards. But at the time, that didn't matter and nobody moaned about it, and that's how life was. That's how life was. But I suppose it just makes the point that you don't need a lot to be happy, really. I know it's like, I shouldn't be the one saying that because I'm probably the guiltiest, I think. But you don't need a lot to find happiness, and as kids that's what we had, happiness and good memories. I'll catch you on the other side. I didn't